Welcome everyone to the last of our IOE debates for the current academic year. Now we started these what-if debates back in October, really with the aim of making an even bigger contribution to education issues. And we've been really delighted with the response that the debates have generated. And I really want to thank everybody that's dipped into these debates over the last 9 months. Thanks particularly, of course, to the TES and to Ed Dorrell, sitting here at the front, for supporting us, partnering with us, and helping to spread the word. Now, we'll soon, of course, be planning our events for next year, and we'd really like your suggestions on topics we should cover and speakers that we should include. After this event, you'll receive an evaluation form by email for the series, and that'll, of course, provide you with an easy way to feed in, so I'd encourage you to do that. Turning to tonight's proceedings, our usual housekeeping matters. You've hopefully seen the posters and flyers around the room with the Wi-Fi login instructions. For tweeters among you, the hashtag is #IOE Debates, all one word. And that's where our live stream audience can submit questions to the panel as well. Now, we're not expecting a fire drill, so if the alarm does sound, we take the doors out at the back and out onto Bedford Way. Now, this evening's debate is a little bit different to ones that have gone before, in that we're looking for the first time at classroom practice, and especially the different ways in which maths can be taught, and how we can help more people to be confident mathematicians. Numeracy, or mathematical literacy, is so important in our everyday lives, but many children, and adults of course, struggle with it. So why do so many people find maths so intimidating and challenging? And what roles do primary and secondary schooling in particular have in either perpetuating or overcoming those difficulties? What can we do as educators, teachers, parents or guardians to help our children develop confidence and enjoyment in working with numbers? Well, to help us open up this black box in learning maths, this evening we're joined by no fewer than 4 leading experts on maths education. So it's a really fantastic opportunity to be able to compare and contrast their inputs and put your questions to them directly. First, we have Professor Dame Celia Hoyles, Chair of Mathematics Education at the IOE. Now, after gaining her first-class degree in mathematics and master's and doctorate in mathematics education, Celia taught maths in London schools from the late 1960s before moving on to higher education. Her contribution to maths education has been extraordinarily wide-ranging. As an academic researcher, presenter of a primetime TV maths quiz show, Fun and Games, remember, 1987 to 1990, the government's chief advisor for maths, director of the National Centre for Excellence in the Teaching of Mathematics, and as president of the Institute for Mathematics and its Applications. And that enormous contribution has been recognised in numerous awards, including, among many others, the prestigious International Commission of Mathematics Instruction's Hand Freudenthal Medal and the Royal Society Kavli Education Medal as well. Most recently, Celia has led the Cornerstone Maths programme, which is designed to help pupils achieve deep learning of the most difficult mathematics problems and concepts. Second, we have Tom Frankham. Tom's a lecturer in secondary mathematics at Birmingham University and until very recently taught maths in several different Birmingham schools. In 2015, he won the TES Award for Maths Team of the Year, and that was for the approach that Tom and his department developed for teaching maths to mixed attainment groups through mixed and rich problem-solving tasks. The underpinning philosophy is that every pupil can develop as a mathematician. Tom's research interests include the effects of setting, economy of teacher and learning time and effort, and the idea of practice through progress. Third, we have Jeremy Hodgen, Professor of Mathematics Education at the IOE. Jeremy's published widely on mathematics education, and in relation to that, teacher education, assessment, international comparisons, and standards over time. His work has had significant impact on policy and practice in schools, as many of you will know, from his studies of post-16 mathematics to the Education Endowment Foundation guidance Improving Mathematics in Key Stages 2 and 3, which was based on his systematic review of the international evidence. His recent and current research projects have looked at low attainment in mathematics and improving competence in algebra and multiplicative structures. Jeremy's also a member of the Royal Society's Advisory Committee on Mathematics Education. And fourth, we have Craig Barton. Craig's been teaching maths since 2004. He's also an advanced skills teacher and secondary mathematics advisor for the TES. But many of you will also know Craig from his popular Mr. Barton Maths.com website and blog, which provides resources for teachers and students, as my own young kids are very aware. Craig is also the co-creator of Diagnostic Questions, a formative assessment website hosting the world's largest collection of maths diagnostic multiple choice questions. Perhaps most pertinent to this evening's debate, Craig recently published How I Wish I'd Taught Maths, Lessons Learned from Research, Conversations with Experts, and 12 Years of Mistakes. So I hope Craig will be sharing that with us today as well. And so we've got a wonderful collection of experts to talk to you, and without further ado, I turn over to Celia to start us off.
Thank you very much. I think I've got the first because I'm the oldest and furthest away from the classroom, and I'm going to just introduce some broad themes. I'm really honoured to be asked to be on this panel. Thank you very much, Becky. And when I read the title, What If We Wanted All Kids to Love Maths? I immediately thought, wow, that's just what I have been trying to do a long time ago when I was teaching. When I did that television programme, it was all to try and show maths was more interesting than a lot of people thought. And then more recently in my research with computers and digital technology. But then I thought again, looking at my exam question, do I really want everyone to love maths? Well, love is a big word. And I'm not sure I want everyone to love maths. I want everyone not to hate maths. I want everyone not to boast that they're no good at maths or be maths phobic. So that I've really sort of changed your question, if you don't mind. And I want to start by thinking, what do we mean by maths in this question? I mean, in a chapter of a book, I wrote with a chapter with Professor Helen Wilson, who is Professor of Mathematics at UCL. We wrote that maths has a problem of perception. Most people think it's just calculation. And in fact, in that television programme that Becky mentioned, I remember in the audience, after we'd done the programme, we used to meet the studio audience, and people asked me, well, one person in particular asked me, what do you do as a mathematician? Do you just do longer and longer sums? And I thought that really is a problem of perception, because all of you who know, if you're a mathematician, the last thing you want to do is any sums. You try and avoid those, and you try and get on to think about structures and patterns and more interesting things than sums. So we have a problem of perception. So then I want to just show you one big problem, which I think might help everybody love maths more. And I'm going to illustrate it by one slide. And it's an old slide, but it's something by a student from Korea. Now, Korea is sort of in the news a bit, so I thought I'd show something in Korea. Korea is also a very high-performing country, does really well at maths. And this particular slide, it's 11 years old, a boy, I believe, and this boy had done every single fraction calculation correctly. Just done adding fractions, multiplying fractions, 100% correct. He knew all the rules for doing those. So just get that. So this kid was high-performing in maths. I actually don't know whether he loved maths, but he was high-performing. I suspect he didn't love maths, because then he was asked to write a word problem using a third times 6. Now, this is what he wrote. The age of her father is 1/3 the age of Minji. The age of Minji is 6. How old is her father? Now, when you think about that, what does this boy understand about fractions and the whole idea of mathematics as modelling real situations? And then the second one was even better. And I remember Professor Liu, who was over here from Korea at the time, telling us about this. He said, now look at this one. Make a word problem using 4 and a 6 plus 3/4. And this poor boy who'd done 100% calculations, thought maths was easy, had written, there are 4 and a 6 gorilla in the zoo. The owner has bought 3/4 gorilla more. What is the total number of gorilla in the zoo? Now, we all thought it was very funny. I'm glad you find it funny, and it is funny, but it shows there is something wrong with this boy's view on what maths is all about and what he can and cannot do. So going forward, I want to ask, we were asked, what would we advise the schools minister or the Minister for Education? I think we were asked if we were the Minister of Education. I found it very hard to put myself in that position. So I'm going to advise the Minister of Education what would we do about it to try and make more children not hate maths and not be phobic about this. And I have 7 points, and I think I can just about do it in the time. My first one to this Minister of Education is stop interfering. And I really mean it. Do not interfere in the curriculum anymore. I know that we all think if only we could do this in the curriculum, this would be better. In fact, I remember very clearly when I was studying A-level, I didn't do complex numbers for some reason. So when I went to university, I was in a bit of a C when I got to university, because other people had done complex numbers. The point is, it doesn't matter. If you have got a learning approach, you will learn complex numbers. So stop fiddling with the curriculum, because I'm absolutely certain that it causes much more stress in schools and so has all this collateral damage. And I want to quote the Royal Society Vision Report on Maths and Science Education in 2014. And they said education systems need to provide stability for the curriculum and its assessment in order to support excellent teaching and enable innovation. And that's what I want, to support excellent teaching and enable innovation. So keep the curriculum roughly as it is, because that's not the important thing. The second thing I'll say to my minister is there's no magic bullet. These things are going to have to change. This is a cultural change in terms of attitude to maths and understanding of maths, and that takes a long time. These things do change. We've only got to look at how education has changed, how women and maths has changed over time. The third thing I want to say is learn from the past, because everybody seems to know that, Department for Education, they start the new innovation. They forget that they did one similar about 10 years ago. So learn from the past and look at the evidence, and then look at effective strategies from other countries. So do some research before you have anything new. And then really what is very dear to my heart is really embrace digital technology to help you in this mission. It's not that it will solve all problems, and not all digital technologies, but really when we have a government now that's launching the fourth strategy or something, they're saying, what are we going to do now in the fourth industrial strategy? It is ridiculous that we're not really empowering our kids using digital technology. And we know that it can change the perception of maths, and it can enable students to experiment with maths and not just think it's a black box. And when we've now got computing and programming, is now compulsory for everybody. Can't we have computing and programming to help us learn mathematics, but other subjects as well? So that's my number 4. Number 5, I think we would encourage Department for Education to work with other departments, not just stay in its little box, and look at other departments, look at HE, look at schools, look at further education, and look at the media, and look at work, and say how all of us together can help to build a more positive attitude to maths. But ultimately, we've got to recognise that teaching and the teacher is the most important thing. That's the way it will happen to get the procedural, the calculation balanced with the conceptual. And so we've got to support teachers.
Celia?
Sorry?
Was that your last one, or sorry, just wrapping up?
It is.
Oh, it was. Very good.
My last one was support the teachers.
Support the teachers.
And I haven't counted because I've actually done 6, but I'll leave the last one.
Well, probably we'll get a chance in the question and answer as well. That's wonderful. Thank you. Tom.
Good evening, and thanks, Becky, again for inviting me to speak. I, like Celia, was also interested in the title, What If We Wanted All Kids to Love Maths? Because there's a strong implication there that they don't already do that. Let's face it, maths has the power to crush confidence and switch students off like no other subject, so it's quite a challenge. And I agree that it's maybe too strong a position to take to say that we might want everyone to love maths. But if we change how we think about what maths is, then I think it's perfectly possible for a lot more people that hate it to not hate it, and a lot more people to feel successful. So I'm going to talk about three things which I think might be helpful in working towards that goal. Firstly, teacher and pupil beliefs. Secondly, what happens in maths lessons. And finally, making big dramatic changes. So, beliefs and messages are powerful. I think more people might enjoy maths if we stop talking about maths ability as if children have a fixed amount of it, and also telling some of them that that amount is not very much. Evidence suggests ability grouping is not an effective strategy for raising attainment, but it's still common for children in this country as young as 4 to be labelled and limited in those ways. I remember my own niece, for example, being put into the bottom group in the first year of school and telling me she's not a maths person like her brothers, and she'd been told that. And what she needed to do instead was find her talent somewhere else. I think setting depends on some underlying assumptions that I would challenge, that pupils' abilities are fixed, that we're good at measuring them, that pupils would learn better and feel better if they're segregated, and that teaching sets is easier. Setting pupils is damaging because it tells some people, you're good at maths, so you don't have to try, and you're not good, so there's no point in trying. And colleagues at this table could speak to the social justice issues. Top sets contain privileged students who see their position as natural and deserved, whereas disadvantaged students are overrepresented in the bottom groups and see it as negative and unfair. And this matters. It makes a difference to how well they do. If 3 pupils with the same scores on entry into a school are placed in different sets, the one in the top set will do significantly better, and the one in the bottom group will do significantly worse. And this matters because we have evidence that most pupils are grouped on the basis of a single test, but underneath that there are also more sinister reasons separate from attainment, such as behaviour or ethnicity or socio-economic status. The sharp-elbowed middle-class parents want their children to be in the top groups, and they have the agency to put pressure on schools. But even if we did have a really reliable way of testing students and measuring ability, and it was only about attainment, roughly half the people will be in the wrong set anyway. I think we also need to change what we value in maths lessons. Teaching is about the most complicated thing that humans do. Teachers do a fantastic job of it, but we have a system where it's not possible for everyone to do well. The wrong incentives mean teachers have to be very test-focused rather than focusing on laying firm foundations for the next steps of learning. So instead of a spiral curriculum, what you get is a vicious circle where everyone rushes through content only to repeat it again and again because no one got it. It always depresses me when questions in a Year 7 lesson that I watch are just practicing the same finished product that you see on the Year 11 exam. I think we should value working in depth on important ideas. What I want as a maths teacher is to develop mathematicians. Yes, they need fluency with procedures, but every pupil is entitled to the whole of the curriculum, so that includes asking questions, making conjectures, being organised and systematic, looking for patterns, noticing things, and explaining and justifying their ideas. If you value these things as a teacher, it stops being about who's the quickest or who remembers the right method or who's already done this with their tutor. I think if there are more ways to be good at maths, more people can be good. I said the final thing I wanted to talk about was big dramatic changes, and I think this is not what teachers and kids need. We're used to change in education, changes in the curriculum, assessment, constant new fads seeking a magic bullet. And I'm all for getting rid of fixed ability thinking, but I don't think everyone should necessarily scrap all their setting practices overnight, though I am willing to take that position for the benefit of this debate. if I were schools minister, I think what I might think would be really beneficial is some stability. Some time where we don't change the curriculum or the assessment or the Ofsted requirements. Some time for teachers to work together on developing their practice in a way that they believe in and can justify. We need supportive accountability where everyone's responsible for developing their own practice and supported to do so. Like, one of the best things about teaching maths is you never get good at it. So I could talk about getting rid of false dichotomies in maths teaching, valuing teachers by having a longer training period, better pay and guaranteed ongoing CPD, or getting rid of overzealous accountability measures. But I'd end with this. No pupil should be limited by their prior experiences. We need teachers who believe every pupil can improve their maths through hard work and good teaching. We need to value working mathematically because every pupil deserves the chance to think deeply about maths. And we need mechanisms for teachers to collaborate, reducing their workload and increasing pupil enjoyment. Thank you.
Tom, thank you so much. And over to you, Jeremy.
Thank you, Becky, and it's a great honour to be here to talk about mathematics education. So, a letter to our Minister. And like Celia and Tom, I want to change the question a bit. What if we wanted all kids to love what they can do with mathematics? And I've got an opportunity here to think about having had 8 years of a government, and it's been a great thing. We've had a government that has been focused on maths. I've been involved in lots of those things. It's been fantastic. Have we achieved things? Well, I've got 5 gaps to talk about. The attainment gap, the participation gap, the relevance gap, the teaching gap, and the evidence gap. And then I've got 6 points for the Minister. The attainment gap. 10 years ago, I conducted a national survey where we compared kids at Key Stage 3, their attainment in mathematics with their attainment in mathematics in the 1970s. Somewhat surprisingly, they'd got worse. And what was most concerning to us was that the low attaining group, those kids who didn't really get the primary mathematics curriculum, had doubled in size. So this government came in, they were fascinated by my results, and they said they'd change things. So has it changed? Well, we don't have another ICAM survey to look at, but we do have international surveys, PISA and TIMSS. So PISA at age 15, 2009, we were about average. And in 2015, we were about average. At TIMSS, at year 9, in 2007, we were just above average at year 9, at age 14. And in 2015, almost exactly the same. Now, our government has not focused on secondary, they've focused on primary. So, at primary, in TIMSS at year 5, in 2009, we scored 541. Now, many of you in the room won't know what 541 is. 541 is good. We are only beaten by a few of the top performing Pacific Rim countries. So we do well in our primary and we do less well in our secondary. And have we improved? Well, no, but we've kept at that high level. The participation gap. In 2010, I published a report commissioned by the Nuffield Foundation looking at participation post-16. And I found that in England and the UK, we were unusual in kids not studying mathematics between the ages of 16 and 18. And as a result of that, Michael Gove in 2011 told the Royal Society that within a decade, the vast majority of pupils would be studying mathematics through to age 18. Now, that decade isn't up yet, but we're quite close to the end of that decade. And we've, has it improved? Well, we've just had a very significant report by Adrian Smith, in which he was asked to look at the possibility of mathematics to age 18. Adrian wants this to happen. What did he say? Well, we haven't improved by much, and we're not ready yet. The relevance gap. About 2013, I conducted a review for the Sutton Trust in which I looked at the mathematics that kids needed for employment. And we came up with this notion of simple maths in complex settings for most kids. That means costing a project, doing some approximation, spotting errors, those sorts of things. Last year, I looked at technical maths in a number of high-performing technical countries around the world, some Pacific Rim countries, Korea and Singapore, some countries in Europe, Germany, not surprisingly, Switzerland, the Netherlands and Norway, and compared them to ourselves. Did we do well? Well, unfortunately, we don't do well in technical and vocational education. Unlike those countries, we view technical and vocational education as the kind of lesser route, and the mathematics is treated badly. Has that improved? Well, again, I point to Adrian Smith's report, and he comes out with the need to focus on technical education and not to focus just on the very highest attainers. The teaching gap. Well, here's one of the biggest problems facing teaching. We knew that when we've known about the supply problem in teaching and in mathematics education in particular for the last 15 years. This government came in wanting to sort that out. Has it improved? Well, I'm on the advisory committee for mathematics education. We've just published a snapshot of where we are in terms of the teacher shortage. At the moment, we're 4,400 secondary mathematics teachers short. We're 13,000 primary specialists. Now, that's not primary teachers who have an A-level in maths. Those are primary specialists who know about mathematics teaching at primary. 13,000. 13,000 primary schools do not have a suitably qualified mathematics expert in school. And in FE, few of our teachers who are teaching level 2 have a reasonable qualification in mathematics. What did Adrian Smith say? Well, it's not good, and it's likely to get worse because of the bulge in the increase in population. The evidence gap. In 2010, again for the Nuffield Foundation, I looked at the evidence across the world for high attaining countries. As Celia said, there's no magic bullet. Again, I looked last year for the Education Endowment Foundation, and we found significant gaps. A significant gap in terms of the questions that teachers ask about what topics to teach. And I found a gap in terms of the need for sustained programs of research. And so, dear Minister, some things. Play the long game. It takes a long time to change education. Learn from our success. The National Numeracy Strategy was a success. Look back at it. Focus on secondary, not primary. Don't forget primary, but focus on secondary. Encourage the maths we need now, as Celia said. Value research. Don't think you know everything about research. Value research and researchers. Be skeptical for sure, but value us as researchers. And prioritise the teacher supply problem.
Well done, Jeremy. Thank you very much. And Craig.
Hi, everybody. I must say, it's an absolute honour to be here tonight. I mean, I'm looking at this panel. We've got Celia, whose title is longer than my speech that I'm intending to say here. We've got Jeremy, whose work has just been a huge influence on me early in my career. His stuff on ICOMS is just absolutely amazing. And Tom, who's the co-author of one of the best books on mathematics that I've ever read in my life. But also to you, the audience, I mean, look at the turnout here. It just kind of says to me how important maths is to people, right? Everybody's got an opinion, everybody's had an experience with mathematics, either positive or negative. this year I'm technically on a break from teaching, a 1-year break, but my year 11, the current year 11s, I taught them in year 7, 8 and 9, and they're coming up to the GCSE. Well, in fact, the last paper was today. So I've been doing a lot of work with them over the last couple of weeks. And something happened at the end of last week that reminded me of both the danger and the beauty of working with adolescents. And that was, I told them what I was doing tonight. And as they were leaving the room, one of my year 11 said to me, "Enjoy your maths debating in London, sir." And I was like, oh, okay. What's interesting, the reason I say that is that particular class have witnessed my transformation as a teacher. I've taught them well, but I've also taught them badly. And the way I've taught them, I think, has had a massive impact on their enjoyment and love of mathematics. Why don't all students love maths? Well, the first thing I'll say is I don't think it's realistic for everybody to love mathematics. Some kids will love it no matter what. Some kids, I could teach them terribly and they'll still love maths. But likewise, some kids will never love it. I remember a couple of years ago, I took over a year 11 class at the start of year 11, and a girl called Georgia walked into class, and I was a big smile on my face, trying to create a positive atmosphere. And I said, "Hi, I'm Mr. Barton." And she said, "Hi, I'm Georgia, and I hate maths." I was like, all right, okay, this could be a long year that we're going to have ahead of us. But with students like Georgia, my aim is to not make them hate maths. And if a kid like that says to me at the end, "Actually, it's all right, that, sir, or I can do that," then I'll take that any day of the week. So I just want to tell you about 2 mistakes I've made that I thought would make kids like maths, but I don't think do anymore. So the first is trying to make it relevant to their lives. Now, this is a little bit controversial, but so a classic question maths teachers get all the time: when will I ever use this in real life, sir? You get it all the time. So I tried to shoehorn as many real-life contexts into my maths lessons as possible. So Ronaldo would score a free kick in the Champions League. I'd think to myself, oh, brilliant, that's the way I can get quadratic equations into the maths lesson. Or I'm teaching Pythagoras, and I'd say to the kids, right, you definitely need to know Pythagoras. And they're like, "Why, sir?" And I say, "Well, imagine you've got a ladder leaning against a wall. What are you even on about here?" And I think Graham Nuttall in The Hidden Life of Learners, he sums it up beautifully for me. He says, students are constantly on their guard against being conned into being interested. And I think that's absolutely perfect to sum it up. But there's another kind of flip side to that. Jo Bowler, who I disagree with a fair bit of what Jo says, but one of her earlier papers had a profound impact on me. It was called, I always get the title wrong, I think it's called something like "When Girls Prefer Football to Fashion." And it's really interesting, this, because it seems logical to try and pick out interests that kids have and bring that into maths lessons. But the evidence suggests that kids actually bring in a load of extra knowledge from things that they're interested in. And when you present them in a mathematical context, you have to simplify them and make them so unrealistic that actually the extra knowledge kids have is actually a detriment to them in trying to understand and have success at the simplified version you're presenting. So, as the title of the paper suggests, girls actually perform better on football questions that they've got no interest in because they don't bring any preconceptions into it, as opposed to if you try and fit things in that they're interested in. So, I no longer, and this doesn't mean I don't purposely plan to make things irrelevant to kids, but I'm no longer obsessed with relevance in real life. So that's first mistake. Mistake number 2 is even a bit more controversial as well. This doesn't go down well. I used to plan for engagement. That was my top priority. I used to think, what is going to engage my students? What's going to make them happy, bubbly, chatting, moving around? So I used to have jigsaws, mysteries, all this kind of stuff in my lessons. It's not sustainable. The kids never enjoyed them or got as much out of them as I did. That was one thing I found. And the kind of quote that I think sums this up, and I've just kind of written it down now, but I'm quite happy with this. I've just made it up now. Novelty is no substitute for success. I think just because something's new, you probably buy your 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 20 minutes, but eventually, if kids aren't successful, the kind of motivation goes. So what does make kids enjoy mathematics? So I've got 2 solutions, actually. The first is the teacher themselves needs to be enthusiastic. It only gets you so far, but it does get you quite a way down. So I've got to be positive about mathematics, even areas of maths that I flipping hate, like anything to do with mechanics, friction, anything like that. I've got to be positive about it because it's not fair for me to put my negative views onto kids. Also, it's important that kids know that I do maths for fun, and I do maths for fun. Music teachers play instruments in their spare time. English teachers love poetry. Maths teachers, kids need to know that I go home on a Friday night and I'm cracking open a maths puzzle, and I'm flipping proud of that. I enjoy that. Kids need to know that I love the subject that I teach. My second solution, I think, is a more sustainable one. I need to make students feel successful. Success is the key. I used to believe that the line of causation went motivate kids and that will lead to success. Now I believe it's the other way around. Make kids feel successful, they become motivated, and then you get into a wonderful, virtuous cycle. There's loads of research on this. A great paper by Zimmerman and Tolverson suggests success leads to motivation. And it reminds me of growth mindset. Growth mindset gets a lot of kind of negative press, but one quote from a child summed up growth mindset for me. One of my year nines had just been in an assembly on growth mindset, and I said to him, how did you get on in that assembly? And he said to me, I'll never forget this line, it's hard to have a growth mindset when I keep doing shit in tests, sir. And I thought, again, it comes back to it again. The foundation for me for enjoyment is success. So, if I was school minister, I would focus on things that make kids successful. I would move away from an emphasis on relevance. And unfortunately, the things that make kids successful are flipping boring stuff. So it is good formative assessment, low stakes quizzes, a knowledge of cognitive load theory, purposeful practice, all these kind of things that sound, God, that is dull. But for me, and this I'll end on this, it's the boring stuff like that that equips students with the knowledge that helps them then enjoy mathematics more, to get more out of all the fun stuff. Because the reason I enjoy all those fun activities and the reason I enjoy mathematics is because I feel successful at it. So if I can make my kids feel successful at it, then hopefully more kids will love mathematics.
Craig, thank you so much. Let's have a round of applause for our panelists. Well, that was enormously both inspiring and hard-hitting by turn, wasn't it? And we've had some, questions and issues ranging from teacher supply, pay, workload, to teaching practices and policy suggestions, and including these sort of conceptual questions in terms of practice around, should we be focusing on the purely conceptual? Should we be making our practice relevant students? And so on. I'm quite interested, panel, that we've had allusions to the Pacific Rim and to different maths practices. We haven't yet had a single mention of maths mastery, which I suspect if we'd had this panel kind of 18 months ago, we certainly would have. Can I just turn to the panel and ask, perhaps this also relates a little bit, Tom, to your points about mixed attainment maths practice. Do you have thoughts? We've heard lots from Craig about his practices. What about... If I can, I won't call them fads because actually I'm personally quite a fan of maths mastery, but trends in maths education. A comment on trends and, if you like, what's productive and what hasn't been. Celia.
Oh, me? Oh, I thought you were asking. Well, if you interpret maths mastery as trying to understand a topic in maths from different points of view, to look at in depth, playing with it, exploring it, that actually is the way to teach maths. I don't think it needs to be called mastery. It's about trying to understand a topic from every point of view. Not like my Korean student. Oh, she's still up there. I should have turned it off. But still just knowing one way. And so I think everybody's in favour of that. But I don't think... What I don't like about your term fads is a fad that somehow this is the right way. And I must say, when I was chief advisor, I had lots of people telling me this is the way to do it. And I was always deeply sceptical because I thought there'd been a lot of brilliant people, a lot of brilliant teachers who really had tried to make things better, and they hadn't found the magic bullet. That's why I want to say there's no magic bullet. So I think maths mastery, it depends what it means. If it means trying to understand things deeply, carefully, trying it in different ways, including using digital technology, why not? Then I'm all for it.
Thank you. Craig?
Again, I'd echo a lot of what Celia said. One thing I'll mention as well is that's directly related to this is you hear a lot about high performing regions and we should try and mimic what's going on in Singapore, Shanghai, and all this kind of stuff. I've been lucky enough on my podcast to interview Lucy Crean, the author of Cleverlands, who visited lots of these regions, and Ed Southall, who spent a lot of time in Japan. And in fact, I was at Research Ed on Saturday, and I was sat in one of Ed's sessions, and he made a fascinating point for me about the kind of mastery approach and the approach that's going on in these high-performing regions. And his point was that we've kind of cherry-picked certain aspects of what's going on in these regions, but not adopted some of the other kind of key things. And he made some kind of really just interesting points. So one that I'd never considered in my life, and this is just me being a bit thick, but board work. So the work that goes on in the boards in these Japanese classrooms and in China and so on, it's like a piece of art, but it's fundamentally important to the success of the lesson. The boards are flipping massive, and you look at it, and the teachers, like when I do board work, like you're lucky if the kids can read it, and I'm making it up as I go along. Whereas the board work has been planned out in advance. It's a fundamental part of the lesson. But how often do you hear that chatted about as a key aspect of successful teaching? And then there's the kind of more obvious ones, like the increased time for collaborative planning and the reduction in teacher load. It just seems to me that if we're trying to emulate the success, we can't just say, oh, I'll have a bit of that and I'll have a bit of that, but I'm going to ignore that, I'm going to ignore that, I'm going to ignore that. If you want to replicate what's going on there, you've got to take a hell of a lot of it to give it a go. You can't just kind of pick and choose. So that's my kind of issue with the kind of mastery approach from these higher performing regions and trying to replicate it here.
Thanks, Craig. Tom?
Well, I think I could pick up on some of those things. Like one mechanism for increasing the collaborative planning is to kind of think about instead of planning a new thing and looking for the new fad and trying to find the answer out there is to just do the same things again and again and get them better. So I mean that's one of the advantages I would say about having, if you have mixed groups, like I would do the same thing with year 7 every year, and everyone in the department does the same thing with everyone every year. So what you can do is share ideas, you can share resources, you can share good questions that you ask, interesting questions that they ask. What would be a good homework? What would be a good thing to support it? What do I need to do beforehand? What can I do afterwards? And you can have all that together and every year get better and better at those kinds of things rather than just being in little silos on your own, because actually teaching can be quite lonely if you're in that situation. Like when I started at my previous school, we had 6 classes and they did 4 different schemes of work. So you could never talk to anyone about what they were doing in their class because everyone was doing something different. So I think those are some of the things that I would pick up from that and a possible mechanism to go about achieving it.
Thanks very much, Tom. And Jeremy?
Who could argue with mastery? But I think well, it's important to look at those countries. Shanghai and Singapore don't do the same thing. Singapore in particular came and took ideas from here in the 1980s and 1990s. That's not to say that there's not something impressive about what Singapore's done. They didn't have an education system to speak of in 1960. That may have helped them. But if you look at how they've done policy, they've played the long game. But they've also looked at what their system has in terms of strengths and weaknesses, in terms of capacity. If you speak to people in Singapore, they'll tell you up front it's great, and then when you speak to them privately, they'll say, "Well, it's not all. We've got these things. We've got these things to do." So they play the long game, and we should look at some of our successes in the past. I talked about the success of primary. In 1995, primary was average. What happened between 1995 and 2002 when we shot up? The national numeracy strategy. And what happened there? Well, 2 things, I think. We used number lines, which are terribly, terribly important for understanding number, and we treated head teachers as heads of teaching. The first training for teachers was for head teachers. They were trained in how to teach and work with their teachers. We need head teachers to be teachers, and we should learn from what we've done here. There are many things about the numeracy strategy that could be improved, but we really ought to look at what we've done well.
Thank you, Jeremy. Well, that's a great stimulation, and I think it's certainly time to turn over to you, the audience, now. So, as usual, we'll take the questions in collections, and if you can raise your hand, and then if you get asked, say who you are and where you're from. So, we've got a hand shooting up in the corner there. Do we have any others? We've got Ed at the front, and a lady here as well. Thank you. We'll take the three. So, starting at the back.
I work on a project called Let's Think, or Cognitive Acceleration in Maths Education. My name's Sarah Selesnyov. I want to ask about the curriculum. Several of the panel have mentioned not meddling with the curriculum, playing the long game, not making too many changes. And my concern really is about the amount of content that we have in our mathematics curriculum, particularly in primary schools. If you look at the curriculum, for example, of countries like Japan, they have around 60% of the mathematical content that we have in our primary national curriculum. And what that means is they can really teach those concepts in depth and get really deep mastery of those mathematical ideas. And I just wonder what the panel think about that, and whether they think that is a contributory factor to the fact that we don't get the outcomes we need in secondary schools.
Thank you very much. Ed.
Hi, I'm Ed Dorrell from the TES, and I'd just like to congratulate the IOE. It's been fascinating so far. I just wanted to riff a bit off what Craig was talking about. It was fascinating to hear again about his Damascene conversion to traditional teaching methods. And so I wanted to ask the rest of the panel whether they agreed with Craig's rejection of relevancy.
Thanks so much. And sorry, can you just pass the, yeah, perfect.
Okay, so Jenny Golding, I work here at the IOE. So I think all of you have pointed to the centrality of teachers here. So if we were able to achieve stability in curriculum and assessment, how do we get from where we are now, where a lot of the teachers who are teaching maths are not ever so confident or particularly equipped mathematically, to where we would like to be with confident, enthusiastic, knowledgeable teachers of mathematics at all levels?
Thank you. Okay, we'll just answer these questions now, and then we'll note the hands shooting up. So, first of all, the amount of curriculum content. Who would like to answer that question?
Well, actually, I really agree with you. But I also, my number one request to the Minister was not to change the curriculum. And I actually think I would prefer to stick with the curriculum, even though I don't like it. I actually think teachers are very good at picking those things that are more important, rather than change it again. Because I really would like all the resources that are put into changing the curriculum, the committees, the awarding bodies, the God knows what else, all of that should go into supporting the teachers. And so even though I really accept what you say, I would rather go for stability.
Thanks, Celia. And sorry, I think, Craig, were you going to jump in?
Very quickly, but this is going to make me unpopular, but I'll just chuck it into the mix anyway. I completely agree for a start, and that was, again, one of the things that I picked up from this Research Ed session about the higher performing regions. The curriculum is a lot more focused to allow teachers and students to go into depth. But yeah, again, I was saying I was at Research Ed Rugby, and it was all kicking off, right? Because there was a debate going on about the primary maths curriculum. And one teacher, a secondary teacher, a prominent blogger, raised the point that he wished that primary school students did no algebra whatsoever in primary school, and then arrived in secondary school to start their algebra, and in fact, if anything, started at year 8 or maybe even year 9, because his point was that it's not, and I'm just going to throw this into the mix. His point was that it's not fair for a non-specialist teacher at primary school, or even a primary maths specialist, to know the algebraic foundations that are going to be needed for success at GCSE or even A-level mathematics. So why not just focus on the number and some aspects of the geometry in greater depth, have less to teach, and then leave the algebra thing to secondary? And it was all kicking off. It was a split audience, but I just thought I'd throw that into the mix because it's directly relevant to the narrowing of curriculum, and I think that it's something that's worth considering anyway.
Thanks very much. We've got the, I'm thinking slightly related question about traditional teaching methods. And I'm going to ask Tom and Jeremy to answer that question, especially because it was related back to Craig.
I don't mind going first. I think rejecting relevance is a good idea. Like, no one cares that I've drank 9/10 of my water glass, and what will happen if I have another sip? Like, that kind of real life maths, that's not real for kids. And if we make it about mortgages or something like that, that's not real for kids. And one of the things that you picked up on was when kids ask things like, when am I ever going to use this? They don't care if you go, it's remarkably useful in the oil industry, right? That's not the question they're asking, and it's not the answer they want, because what they're really saying is, I don't get what I'm doing here. And that's why the success thing is really important. And I suppose I think this comes back as well to the previous question, because we have a lot of autonomy in our system, and there are pros and cons of that, but schools can design a curriculum that does go from reception all the way up until you're 18 years old and you leave after doing your A-levels, and we could build in practice so people can feel successful. And I think that would be a good way of kind of restructuring, and people have the chance to do that. So plus, you can save a lot of time if you chuck out all the real-life math stuff and just work on the concepts. You can make, another thing is, don't think practice has to be boring. You can make it genuinely interesting, because it's genuinely like puzzling, like that there's an interesting thing to find in the way I construct this practice. So there are chances to kind of work as a mathematician, because there's opportunities to notice things about the way you've picked your questions, or there's something to discuss at the end of this.
Thank you, that's really helpful. Jeremy?
I suspect we mean different things by relevance, and I don't think, I wouldn't put relevance as real life. We certainly want kids to go out of school thinking that maths is important and valuable and that it will be used. And for sure, Craig, part of that is being successful at mathematics. And it's not inventing silly problems that look irrelevant. Irrelevant to kids. But I think it's my son's friend Jacob came back after finishing his GCSE, it's about 10 years ago, and he said, "That's me done with maths." Now that is wrong, actually. That we can let kids who are relatively good at maths go out at the system thinking that this is not going to be useful or valuable to them. Interestingly, my son tells me that all he ever does now is maths, because he runs a business. So there's a good news story at the end of it.
Thank you. And then we had Jenny's question about building confidence. Do we have somebody that would like to answer that? Building competence and confidence, I think that was the point.
I'll say
Craig,
a quick
please.
thing, if that's okay. This is something I've been considering a fair bit recently. I remember when I first started teaching, so this is maybe my 14th year as a teacher. Like, God almighty, first 2 or 3 years I was terrible. Like, I could not plan a lesson to save me life. And I still remember my first ever maths lesson was with a group of year 8 students, and it was on adding fractions. And I thought my friends from uni had slipped all these kids a tenner just to wind me up, because like the mistakes they were making, I'd never seen anything like it, because I'd never experienced those kind of misconceptions, because I'd always been good at maths. And I went through those first 3 years, just like trying to avert a car crash every single lesson. I could not plan a lesson, I could not structure a lesson, and I got better, but God almighty, it was a slow, painful process. And kids suffered. I have no doubt kids, my wife suffered, I know that with me moaning all the time, but the kids definitely suffered. So when on my podcast, I interview kind of maths teachers and kind of leading professionals and stuff, and a trend that's been coming out from some of the heads of department is that they actually centrally plan the lessons. So the head of department and another responsibility holder will essentially centrally plan lessons that will be delivered by all members of staff. Now, the first time I heard this, I thought that is a terrible idea, because where do new ideas come from? Where's this kind of freedom as a teacher and all this kind of thing? Aren't you stifling innovation? But then I thought about it, and I thought, me in my first 3 years what would have been better for the kids? What would have been better for me as a teacher? Would it be me trying to figure it out for myself? Or would it be to have a template that has been planned by two incredibly experienced teachers, that's been modified over 5 years, 7 years, that they've had proven success with, and I could focus on all the other things that a new teacher has to do: behaviour, timing, pace, projection, all that kind of stuff, knowing that at least the structure of the lesson is taken care of. So I think that's one way of potential, it's controversial, but maybe one way of improving teaching is to go to more centrally planned lessons within departments.
But thanks, Craig. And of course, that's a sort of trend that we're seeing across particular multi-academy trusts and so forth, particularly. Tom, what do you make of that?
Well, I think you could go further. Like Jeremy mentioned, we're 13,000 primary specialists short, but some schools have primary maths specialists, so they could be working more kind of collaboratively across schools, and we could reduce the sort of competition of the kind of league tables and have it as a more of a thing where we're actually in this together because we want to improve the outcomes for pupils, all the things that really teachers got into teaching for. So that would be my take.
Thank you. Okay, another round of questions. Now, we had a gentleman who, that's right, in the middle here. And I did see the hand at the back, first of all. And then I'm noting the gentleman with his hand up in the middle here, so perhaps we can pass it there afterwards. But starting here, thank you. Can you say who you are?
Sure. My name is Mohit. I'm from a company called Manga High. We make video games to teach maths. So I know Celia has mentioned a couple of times the importance of digital technologies. I wondered if the panel had advice for companies as to how we can support educators on making a product that would actually help engage, make kids more successful. So what advice would each of you give to companies like us?
Very pertinent question, thank you. And then, gentleman at the back.
Yeah, I strongly agree with many of the points the panel made. Celia's point about stability, Jeremy's point about valuing research, Craig's point about you can't teach effectively mathematics without being passionate and showing that, and Tom's point, I very strongly agree with the arguments about setting and so on. But the question I wanted to raise, now I've just been reading a book by John Hattie, who some people will know, and there are problems with meta-analyses or meta-analyses. That's a different discussion. But he highlights one thing where he says this does seem to be effective, and it certainly chimes with my experience. So I'm Paul McGall, I'm joint head of maths at Langdon Park School in East London, which is where small group work of students working together, talking together about mathematics, he says there is evidence that that's very effective, and certainly in my own experience, I find that an extremely powerful way to get students interested, engaged and successful in mathematics. And I wonder, but when I go around different schools, I see very little of that in schools. In my view, there should be a lot more of it, and I wonder what the panel's views on that are.
Thank you very much. And then, yeah, in the middle.
Thank you. Thank you all panelists. My name is Daniel. I'm teaching at Wanstead High School. This question is for Mr. Barton. Thanks for your suggestions and teaching with enthusiasm and making students feel successful. But then what recommendations can you make, going from here? If I have to go and, speak to my student, how can you make them feel successful? What pointers or what things, should we work with? Well, I want to take that on board, particularly as a measure or yardstick to, that, I should be highlighting that, wow, I've done X, Y, Z to make them feel successful.
Thank you so much. So we start with the question about digital technology and how can it be more helpful to educators, and I think we need to go to Celia on that one.
And actually, I've got a really easy answer to that, because it so happens there is a project in the lab where I work, the London Knowledge Lab, called Educate, which is actually just exactly set up to do that, as far as I understand. I'm not part of it, but it's to try and put businesses in touch with educators who could then advise them as to make their product better. So I think that's something, it's really good that you're thinking about that, and it's a very good product. But now I've got the stage, and I'm really going to be told off, I'm sure. But I really want to tell Craig that actually this relevance, and say that saying maths is relevant by putting ladders against walls is really a ridiculous example. And you have to look at some of the fascination of maths is because of its uncanny relevance. So, for example, I remember thinking not so very long ago, do you know why mathematicians can predict where satellites are? They can predict it by looking at mathematical equations. And then the astronomers focus their telescopes there. So there are lots of really fascinating and real world. It can help with medicine. There are ways that mathematics has shown that you can predict people who are going to have strokes by modelling, looking at fractals, in fact, which is a very beautiful part of maths. So let's just do silly maths applications. Let's try and get the maths relevant by introducing some of these really big ideas. Sorry, I just usurped my position.
Thanks, Celia. No, it's good to have the debate. Small group work, Tom.
Yeah, I think there is a place for small group work. It's particularly useful for things like interventions, and my mixed attainment colleagues might lynch me for saying this, but I think this is a time where I might advocate some sort of grouping by ability, where I think the problem with kind of grouping by ability more generally is we're not very good at knowing how good people are, really. But there are instances where I go, oh, you're not very good at this very specific thing that we're doing today. That I might want to do a bit of kind of like remedial work to try and improve that thing so you're ready for tomorrow. That's one of the ways that people use interventions in the Pacific Rim countries that we mentioned, and I think that could be a good use of small group work. I also think there's a place for that in day-to-day lessons, and there's some stuff about from like the cognitive load literature about when that works and like how you can share the cognitive load across members in the group. So I think, yeah, there are lots of uses of small groups.
Yeah, and there's good evidence of statistical significance, isn't there, in terms of small group work?
Some evidence.
Okay, some evidence.
I mean, the reason why we should do small group and collaborative work is that's an outcome of mathematics. We shouldn't give kids the idea that mathematics is something that you do individually. It's something we communicate with. It's something that scientists and engineers figure out where the satellites are, and they tell other people, and they argue about it. So.
And Craig, how do we get kids to feel successful?
I mean, the best piece of advice I could give is buy my book. That would be the
Best piece.
But yeah, it's a tricky one. I've kind of just adopted it sounds the most obvious thing in the world, but just a really simple approach to, especially when I introduce something to kids for the first time, that just really tiny changes I've made to my practice that helps them achieve and feel success earlier on in the process. So I'll just give you a very, very quick example. So say I was introducing how to add two fractions together or something like that. A classic example. I would, in the past, and again this is controversial, but I'll just go for it. In the past I would invoke a big discussion. So what I would do, I'd put two fractions up on the board and I would say to kids, what should we do? What would you do first? And the problem with that approach is there's kind of three things that can happen. One is a child puts his hand up after a discussion and says exactly what I was going to say, says exactly how to add those two fractions together perfectly. Now that's fine because I know that child understands it, but what about the other 29 in the class? That's a bit of a waste of time. The other thing that can happen is a child says something and just gets it completely wrong, says a method that is either reveals a significant misconception or is just completely wrong. And the problem is in the past I used to love that because I used to think, brilliant, that's discussion time, it's all going to be kicking off now. So I would say, all right, that's brilliant, does anybody have a comment about that? And then a child say, oh, I think this, and then another child, I think this, I think this. The more I thought about that, the more I realised that that's actually quite a bad thing to do at that stage when I'm introducing a concept for the first time, because these discussions are really confusing for students. But imagine you're a kid who doesn't understand how to add fractions together. What's going to be better for you? To listen to this discussion going on in the room, or to listen to me explain it in a way that I've planned out, using a visual aid perhaps that I've planned out, in a cognitively accessible way. So perhaps by having everybody in silence, no distractions in the room, me modelling in silence, then annotating over the top. And so a kind of big change that I've made to my teaching to help kids feel successful, and I know this shouldn't sound controversial, but it is to a lot of people, is I teach more. I speak more. I take more control over how I introduce things to students. And the discussions come later on in the process, at a point where I've given kids an explanation, I've given them a chance to practice, and as Tom rightly says, practice does not need to be boring. Some of the best practice I've ever seen, it's the second plug, so you'll give me a tenner later or something, Tom. But for Tom's book he co-authored with Dave Hewitt, has some of the best practice, engaging practice I've ever seen. But kids can only benefit from that when I've imparted some knowledge or given them the best chance of understanding things. And for me, that is me explaining things in a careful way. So a big change for me has been to take a lot more control over my lessons. And we'll have the discussions afterwards at a point where kids are best placed to benefit from them. But that's how I make kids feel successful. It's not revolutionary at all.
Thank you. I think, did you want to just add a quick comment? Very quick.
I could add a quick thing that's related to the first question. I think that there's a halfway house in between that where I just break down the concepts much more, spend longer on the concept. So if we're doing the adding fractions thing, I definitely have wanted to do some work. Why are we doing adding fractions? Well, it's on the curriculum, which you don't want to change. But if we're doing that, one of the things that I'd want to have done beforehand is go, here's two fractions, what would be a good common denominator? Because, the other thing I see is not enough examples. Yep. One of the most effective ways that I think people learn is through seeing lots of examples. And hardly anyone who does, if you're going to teach with examples, people don't do enough examples. But loads of pairs of fractions where you go, what's a good common denominator? But really, adding fractions is about, adding. So I need to really work on what the concept of adding is, and if anyone wants to know how to do that, I can talk about that in more detail. I'm looking at the orange card.
Very good. Well, I'm hoping that we'll have a chance for another round of questions, certainly before the end. We did a Twitter poll, as we always like to for these debates, and the question today was, should everyone be required to study maths to age 18? Something that Jeremy has strongly advocated for in his policy work. Interestingly, we've got a very split result. In terms of yes, everybody should be required to study maths to age 18. 49% of the pollsters responded positively to that, and 51% said no, everyone shouldn't have to. So there's a letting off the hook for some there, definitely. I've seen lots of hands up. Let's have one final round. This is terrible now. So here at the front, definitely, for our Knowledge Lab colleague, and a lady at the back, and then a gentleman on the right-hand side. Please.
Thank you, Becky. Really stimulating debate. Well done to the panellists so far. I've been listening out and I haven't heard what I feel might be a rather large white elephant sitting in the middle of the room in relation to how we might encourage kids to like maths more. The assessment and the endpoints, particularly in the context of 16, 17, 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, 35-year-olds, 40-year-olds still struggling to get that elusive grade C.
Thank you very much, grade C. That's perfect. Question? Yeah.
Hi, I'm a PGC student here. So my question is, I guess, mostly for Tom. On mixed ability grouping, I really like the idea of it, but I am very worried about the danger of teaching to the middle and letting kids down by doing that. And I wonder if you could talk a bit about that and whether you think that's something we can avoid and how.
Thank you. And then,
Yeah, thanks very much. My name is Jonathan Fletcher. I am visiting. I'm a former student of this great university and a former numeracy teacher educator. My question is on assessment. It looks as, but I think this is a bit controversial because I believe that there are so many contradictions in assessment. And that may be one of the reasons why not everybody likes mathematics, because I believe strongly that to make people successful in mathematics, you've got to make sure that the assessment system is helping them to be successful. So on the one hand, you are giving the assessment system which is making everybody feel successful. On the other hand, you want your assessment to discriminate between people who actually, students who actually have the concept and people who don't. And it seems to me that students have a nasty way of comparing their performance with one another, and so they know in the pecking order where they come.
Thank you, Jonathan.
And that is one of the reasons why.
That's a really good point, so we'll pick that up. So we've got the question about assessment and tests, and also there's the point about the C grade cut-off and retakes, but also, this point about assessment as a mechanism of sorting, challenging, can all kids be successful? No, they can't if we're norm reference for our testing. Who would like to answer that question?
Celia, if you want me to start again.
And just noting the time,
right,
if we can keep everything brief. Thank you,
It's a very
colleague.
difficult question, is assessment. I think we have far too much assessment in this country. I think we should actually move a lot to diagnostic assessment. And I think we can, dare I say it again, you can do a lot through using the computer without big deal stuff. And I think that assessment can inform and support the teaching. So I would actually reduce the big test till 18. And one of the reasons I say this is there's so much time is spent revising for the next big test. And I think I would love somebody to quantify the time and resources that's taken for that. So reduce it, do much more formatively, and support your teachers in doing that well together.
Thanks, Celia. Jeremy, you wanted to...
My colleague Hugh Burkhart used to say, what you test is what you get. So getting our technologies of testing right, thinking of technologies in the broadest sense, is really, really important. Just to pick up on Celia's point about assessment, strangely, if you look at TIMSS, our teachers use assessment almost less than in any other country. Now, that's not that we don't have high-stakes assessment. Of course, other countries have high-stakes assessment. It's we don't use much classroom-based assessment. And classroom-based assessment can only help teachers.
And on the point about the GCSE retakes, which I think you were getting at, I mean, it's really interesting. We know that there is a very significant return in terms of sort of future remuneration and success for kids that gain their GCSE maths and English. But of course, this, the sort of enforced retakes and retakes with an ever-decreasing rate of success is really tragic, both for students and teachers. One of the things that I've been arguing is that we should have one retake to give kids that opportunity to gain the value, which is a very strong value of a GCSE maths, but then after that we should be looking at functional maths to make sure that everyone goes away equipped, but without focusing endlessly on an unattainable goal. Handing over to the point about attainment grouping, Tom?
Yeah, well, on the last point, I mean, why does everyone have to take their GCSE at age 16? Why not, if we thought people weren't going to pass, why not allow them to take it later for the first time? Because then you could avoid the retake thing, have more time on things.
Which, Tom, is what they do in Singapore.
Yes. That's interesting.
So the mixed attainment thing, so the thing that you're worried about is teaching to the middle. So one of the things, that tends to be a symptom more of set, because what happens is I put you in a group where I think, oh, these people are all the same ability. So I think you always get a range of ability, and it's kind of trite to say that every group is a mixed ability group or a mixed attainment group. But if you're teaching in mixed attainment groups, you have to acknowledge that. Whereas in sets, I think it's easier to get away from that and pretend and teach in a way where I assume they're all the same, when actually they've got completely different prior experiences. Yeah, we don't know loads about what that should look like, really, even though everyone in Scandinavia is doing this every day. But because everyone there is doing that every day, no one really asks them. So we don't necessarily know what that looks like, this really effective mixed attainment teaching. So perhaps something you can pursue going forward.
Colleagues would agree, it's in our Education Endowment Foundation's funded study, it's been particularly controversial in maths. There does seem to be, a particular concern among the maths educators that somehow, setting should take place in maths where it doesn't in other subjects, which is just fascinating. And I think we need to dig into it, whether that's valid or not.
Did you say among maths educators?
Well, yeah. I suppose there's all sorts of issues if you have sets like it, because everyone assumes it'll be bad for the lowest attainers, but for everyone else it's sort of all right. But if you're in the top set, the high sets have like high pressure. They think the teachers go too fast, that they expect them to be able to do things without thinking time and understanding. And if you're in low sets, yes, it is worse. You get the low expectations, you get low-level work, you get the less thinking time, least qualified teachers, less experienced teachers. You don't get the same curriculum.
Thank you, Tom. Craig, very last comments?
Yeah, I was just going to pick up on GCSE resits, just very, very quickly, to echo what Celia and Jeremy said. I thought I'd best agree with Celia at some point, or she won't do it to me again after the ladder's leaning against the wall. GCSE resits are flipping hard to teach. It's a really kind of demoralising situation, because you've got kids often who come from lots of different colleges. They've inevitably failed or feel like failures at mathematics, and you have not much time to teach them. And you have really rubbish data, because all you often have is their GCSE result. I mean, what on earth does that flipping tell you? And best case scenario, maybe you can get kind of a question by question breakdown about how they did in their GCSE. But just because they got question 3 on Celia's favourite, adding fractions together, doesn't mean that they can't add fractions. It could be any number of reasons that they couldn't do it for that. So again, to agree with Celia and Jeremy, formative assessment is the key, the absolute key for those kids. When you're teaching in a reduced amount of time and you've got a hell of a lot of content to get through, you need an effective, accurate way of diagnosing exactly what they can't do and why they can't do it, and then teach them that.
Colleagues, that's been absolutely fascinating. I think we've learned a lot about how to get kids not to hate maths, not going to say not to love maths, not to hate maths, and also whereas, avoiding silly real-life examples, why we need to communicate that maths is both desperately needed and important in the wider world. So on that note, I'd like to ask you to join me in thanking the panel, but also thanks so much to you for great questions.